Bé, bon dia i benvinguts a aquest acte de Sant Jordi que fem conjuntament a Copenhaguen i a Barcelona. Good morning and welcome to this joint event we are holding both in Copenhagen and in Barcelona to celebrate Sant Jordi. That is the International Book Day, which is on the 23rd of April, next Sunday, and which in Catalonia is a very important festivity. And we're celebrating it with the renowned Danish writer Suzanne Brøgger, who is the author of this book, among many other books, of course, novels, diaries, essays. But this is her very first book, Fri os fra kærligheden in Danish, Deliver Us from Love in English, and now Alliberem-nos de l'amor in Catalan, which has recently been published by BonPort. Right now we are in the premises of the Gyldendal publishing house here in Copenhagen, and from here we will have the possibility to talk to Suzanne and to connect with Barcelona, to the event which has been organized down there at the bookstore Llibreria Calders, and where there are already some people watching us and waiting for our conversation to start. And there are also there in Barcelona two Catalan writers, journalist Àstrid Bierge, who is also the author of a collection of short stories, and Bernat Dedéu, who is one of the leading op-ed writers in Catalonia and also a philosopher. And they are also eager to talk to Suzanne. But first of all, welcome, Suzanne. And thank you for being here today.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
We are very happy. I'm very happy to be sitting here with you and to have the possibility to have this conversation with you today. Well, we have this book now in Catalan, your opera prima. It's about 50 years after it was first published in Danish. It was a great success back then in the 70s, in 1973 specifically. It was a great success. It was translated into many languages. So we could say in Catalonia we are a bit behind schedule. But actually, when I read that, because I've read it several times as a translator of the book, but when I read it, I find it so modern, so brilliantly written, so intelligent, not only in terms of the contents and of the topics you approach. You talk about the relationship between man and woman, of women among themselves, of men among themselves. You also explore the emergence of new genders, which actually it was a trailblazer. You were a trailblazer at that time. I don't think many people talked about that back then in the 70s. You talk about the traditional role, or the role of the traditional marriage, the role of traditional love in modern society. You talk about the drawbacks of the welfare state within a capitalist, consumer, materialist society in our Western societies. You talk about all of this, but it's not only this, it's also how you use irony, how you place yourself at the very center of the narrative, how you engage the reader, how you play with the reader, putting him or her against his or her own contradictions. Now, I think it's not easy to find parallel voices to yours in the public discourse nowadays, where we often see that, somehow the emphasis is put on the weakness rather than on the boldness, and where, sometimes we see this, we see that weakness is exploited instead of the strong voice. Whereas in your case, I see freshness, I see this distanced way of explaining things, I see boldness, and at the same time, I see a sense of humor and irony. This combination, this equilibrium is so difficult to find. What do you think about it? And how do you feel about the book having been translated into Catalan?
Well, the way you describe the book, I'm so pleased that finally the book has found a very good reader. That I had to wait for 50 years to get a good reader who really is sensitive to what I was trying to do at that time, where the book was very scandalous. It was not really a nice experience. I felt good about writing it, and at that time there were a lot of ideological books about gender and sexual liberation, women's liberation, gay liberation. There were all these movements, mostly coming from America, but I thought that they were written in a very standardized, ideological way. And I thought if I wanted to write my first book, it would have to be very personal and with a humoristic distance. But I wanted to take all the pillars of society, all the structures that we build society on and that we take for granted and that we have to cherish to uphold the society as it is. But I thought, what if we don't want society as it is, but a different kind of life, another way of living, another kind of society? Then we have to attack all these pillars that uphold the building. We have to go to the foundation of the house and examine what is rotten, what will not hold. So I just went about all the structures and tried to write in my own way, sort of investing my own life in the project. So it was not only theory, but also personal experience.
Exactly, that's what we really see. I mean, this strong literary self, right, behind the writing. Okay, so now let's try to connect with Barcelona. Let's start with Bernat. I think Bernat was fascinated about your book too. Right, Bernat? We were talking about it yesterday. You were really raging about it.
You bet I am. I am fascinated indeed. And let me say, first and foremost, I've enjoyed this book very much, thanks in part to the splendid translation, Catalan translation that Diana has done. Of course, I don't know how to read the original because I don't know how to read Danish, but the Catalan that it's inside the book sounds and is perfectly structured, so it helps a lot. So thumbs up, Diana. You've done a great job, and indeed the edition is also very good, and it captures the wit and the enormous skillfulness of this writer. And we're going to talk maybe later about the subject matter within the book, but the first thing that struck me about this Alliberem-nos de l'amor was, let me put it in some way pedantically, the multiplicity of genres that's inside this prose. You're reading diaries, you're reading a novel. In some ways, you're always also reading journalism, maybe theater as well, because it's a novel full of dialogues and theater. So the first thing I would like to ask, when I was finishing the book, I had the sensation of having read a novel written by a war correspondent about the absurdity of European middle class. I don't know if that was the intention of Suzanne while reading it, because at the same time, there's also this multiplicity of voices within the book. But as Diana said before, you always have the sensation that the voice of the author lies within all that multiplicity. So first I want to talk about the multiplicity of genres within this and this view of a foreign correspondent of war about our daily life and the pillars of our society. And then how did she manage to write about this multiplicity of voices that are in the book while maintaining this inner voice which is so powerful?
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Bernat. Would you like to ask some question to Suzanne specifically
I don't know if that was intentional. I mean, while she was beginning to write the book, did she want it to be like some kind of journalistic approach to novel or the diaries, which are a very strict form of writing in terms of tradition, or she just like went and wrote it like through it like very intuitively?
Well, I thank you for your acute observation, because I wanted to play with genre. How do you say genre in
French? Yeah.
Because in the 1970s, it was like the traditional novel had died or was stale or was not very inviting to me. And it was also at the time when in France they were developing the new novel, le nouveau roman, with Rob Grillet and Nathalie Sarraute, all those people who were making experiments. But I wanted a different kind of experience and to play with genre and deliberately to find a mix of different approaches. But I love the metaphor of being a war correspondent, going in to observe what is happening in this strange area called the middle class life.
Okay.
What about the voices? I mean, were you also a journalist while writing this novel? Because there are a lot of voices within. I mean, it's I don't know if you've read many theater, but I'm sure you have, because the technique is very theatrical.
Well, actually, I had been a war correspondent before I published Deliverance from Love. I had been in Vietnam in the war and written for Politiken, our daily newspaper, and I had been in the Middle East when the Palestinian movement was emerging. So I had been practicing journalism, and there are different approaches to whether a writer should do journalism or not. Henry Miller, the American writer that I got to know, he was very much against it. He thought journalism is so stupid. But for Hemingway, he was a journalist as well as a novelist. So there are no rules, but I like the directness of journalism. And I didn't want to write a very literary book. I was sort of proud that the libraries did not know how to place the book.
It's interesting because it really, that's what makes it special. I mean, it's not an essay. It's, as Bernat put it, is like a blending of genres, but and it's not literary. But at the same time, you really see this authorial voice very, very strongly present all the way through the book. And I think it's a common thing in your works in general. So I think maybe this has something to do with, I mean, I saw on your Twitter profile, you have the word, you use the word author instead of writer. And I think it's a way of beautifully placing the emphasis on the act of writing behind, on the voice behind the act of writing, sorry. Yeah. Is that maybe because you use experience in order to write rather than writing after the experience? You said you were a war correspondent, you have lived in many different countries, in many different situations. You were always like looking for the boundaries, right? And I have this impression that you also did because you felt as a writer and you needed that in order to write also, like to go beyond somehow, beyond boundaries. Yeah, and also it comes up to my mind right now. You once said, I don't remember where, something like when the pen hits the paper, it's frightening, because then frightening things, you end up writing things which maybe you would have wished to have written, right? So this also shows the power that there is behind the act of writing. And that's what you see in this book all the way through, that there is this powerful thing which is behind the actual words, which is you, actually, right?
Yeah, there's a writer behind. Yeah. In French, they say,
Auteur.
Où est la femme? But we can say, où est l'auteur?
Yeah.
Yeah, where is the writer?
Yeah, exactly. Àstrid, do you want to add anything? Do you want to make any comments? You were also really interested in the book. You also loved it. Please tell us why, and ask your questions to Suzanne.
I did love it. First of all, because it's delightfully written, and that's not so easy to find. Even if you don't agree with some of the perspectives of the book, you can still enjoy it so much. It's always it always grabs you and drags you, and you're always entertained. The book actually deals with issues that are hard, dark, and even disturbing, right? But there's always this sense of humor, and it's really fun to read, even in the darkest spots. It's always fun, and that's it's a lovely book to read, and it has a lot of interesting ideas. I insist, even if you don't agree with some perspectives, they're still interesting. You can still see a functional brain behind there, and you can see an author that it's willing to pay the price of her ideas, and that's extremely courageous, right? It's a really brave book. It's even braver if you think that it was written in the early 70s. It took a lot of balls to write this book, so good for you. And also, I want to insist that the translation is delicious. You really can feel it as if Catalan was the original language of the book. So, Mrs. Brøgger, you can be confident that Diana did a very good job with it. And well, I was very. It's obvious that you can feel in the book that you're interested in human behavior and social relationships and differences between male women and men. So you're interested on human beings, right? But I don't know if, of course, I guess you're a different person now, so many years after having written this book, and you've had newer experiences, and I guess you've gained new knowledges. I don't know if you've been in contact during these decades with this more scientific approach to human behavior. I know this is not a book that pretends to be a scientific approach to social relationships, but a personal insight of it, right? But in the early 70s, it just was starting this like evolutionary biology, evolutionary psychology, that takes into account how our hardware is made, right? So culture and moral rules are our software, right? And there can be many different softwares that you can run in the human hardware, right? But hardware still exists. We are still, you cannot run like a PlayStation video game on a calculator. So there's a limited things we can do with the human hardware. I think of a part of the book in which it's a sentence that was really funny to me, that you said, I don't have revolutionary sexual fantasies, right? And you were like angry at it. I would like to have revolutionary sexual fantasies. I'm really not sure we can have revolutionary sexual fantasies, because it's a really primary impulse of our human nature. So I'm curious if during these decades you've been interested or in touch with a more scientific approach to human behavior, and if you would like, in this sense, change some of your views that are described in your book. Another example is, for example, at one point you said if the world was feminine, it would be women raping men, right? I don't think evolutionary psychologists or biologists would be happy with that statement. And I don't think if your perspective has changed through years on that.
Thank you, Àstrid. Well, I don't know exactly what you mean by scientific, because while writing this book, and ever since, I've always been interested in anthropology. I've studied anthropology all my life, so of course I'm very interested in different cultures, how different societies are constructing themselves or reinventing themselves, and does that mean that I have changed my views? Well, I change every day, but I never meant this book to be something you should agree with, and I know you don't take that approach, that either you are for or against a certain statement, and never mind agreeing or not, but if it's a book you can have a conversation with and that can bring your thoughts alive, that's okay with me. But again, what you mean by scientific approach, in the past 50 years since I wrote the book, I think that, for instance, psychoanalysis was very much in the vogue 50 years ago, and also anti-psychiatry with Ronald D. Lang, etc. And that has gone out of fashion and been replaced by drugs, by medicine. That if you have psychological problems nowadays, you are given a pill, and your symptoms, also the very widespread symptoms of stress these days, are never taken as in a context of the social conditions, but it's considered as a private weakness, and that you need some medicine for that. So the scientific approach has been changing all along, and but I'm more interested in the anthropological approach, asking why does it change, and trying to keep awake to examine what's happening. And
well, but
yeah,
the anthropological approach is also a scientific approach. I'm not denying anthropology as a scientific approach, but I do can gasp in your book that you really believe that we could organize ourselves so much differently than now, and that there's a part in the book that you say that it's the system that makes us, right? And as if like nurture was the only thing that counted, and not nature. And of course, in anthropology, there's the concept of cultural universals, right? Which are traits that repeat in all the cultures of the world. So they kind of are kind of the essence, right, of human nature, because if they are in all the cultures that have been studied, it's because somehow those traits are human. So basically that was the question. If you've become like I don't know how to say, like more open to consider that there are some limits of our nature that we cannot overpass, and that maybe when we're thinking of designing moral rules or social relationships between women or men, we should take into account the limits of our hardware to be able to design a software that matches us better.
But you don't know what can be changed unless you try it. And you don't know where the limits are unless you transgress them. So you have to start with saying, let's try. And for instance, 50 years ago, it was impossible to imagine men to have nurturing feelings towards babies. But right now in the European Union, they are passing laws that give daycare to men. And nowadays, it's very fashionable for males to walk around with their babies and flashing their fatherhood. That's very that's the latest fashion here.
Probably it's a matter also of equilibrium, and as you said, trying new things and saying what changes, and right. Yeah, and when you talk about the social structures and how you try to undermine them, or even if it is only rhetorically, right? When you wrote these chapters in this book, which are a blend of genres, right? But when you talk about these social structures, and there is a strong criticism to the welfare state, or not directly to the welfare state, but to the capitalist societies, how the capitalist societies shape this welfare state, which actually is, which encapsulates families, right, and drags them into a system where they are, let into a numbing life, sort of, right, where they are not really free to choose what they really want, because they are just all of them doing the same, right? Contracting these, vacations, engaging on a mortgage, buying house, so you go into this system and you don't have time to really think of other possibilities. You don't have the possibility to explore the world outside, right? Now, 50 years after, how do you see this criticism? Because this is one of the things which struck me most in the book, because actually, if you see right now how we are leading our lives in Western societies, nothing has changed that much in that sense. We all have our lives in the nuclear family, as you name it, which is probably also a very fashionable term, right, at that time, but it also works, right? The nuclear family, even if it is only two. You also talk about how the family has been shrinking, and it had a very useful practical sense in the Middle Ages, where they were communities where every person had their tasks. Now it's been reducing, shrinking. We have nuclear families of two, for example, or three, and encapsulated, not really leading a common life where everybody has its place. And how do you see this? Because has it changed much? And what's your opinion? Would you?
Well, I think that nowadays the individual has emancipated himself or herself so much that in Copenhagen, I think the majority of people are singles. And at the same time, I think that nowadays it would be more useful to live with other people than living alone. Living alone with the internet. I think nowadays it's a real challenge to meet real people, not let alone living with real people. I think that's very difficult nowadays. But real relationships are very difficult to have now because the individual has emancipated. We have emancipated ourselves so much, and that we don't need other people really, except in poor countries. That's what I heard the other day in Argentina, that the inflation is so high that you can only survive by living with other people and helping other people.
So it has actually turned out to be a dystopical situation. It doesn't have this situation where people have broken the rules in that sense, in the family, nuclear family sense. This hasn't really served this utopical idea of exploring new worlds, but rather closing themselves.
Yeah, I think so.
At home and in their own world. Okay. What do you think, guys, in Barcelona? Bernat, Àstrid?
Let me just, I wanted to ask something before, and now I think it's the right moment, because there was something that Àstrid was emphasizing about the book, which has to do more with the reader than with the author. While reading this book, I had many times like attacks of laughing, which basically coincide with the most sordid and awful moments. For instance, I love the psycho-pedophile story, love story indeed, with the young actress or writer of theater, because whenever there was this kind is a very it starts very neoplatonically, while they're like falling in love in some way, and then the guy just gets naked and jerks off in front of her, and I was like, while I was reading this, I was like, this woman has the same sense of humor than me, which is not very usual here in my country, by the way. But taking it seriously, so I wanted to ask if that was something deliberate, that you wanted to, to put the reader in this sort of distasteful situations, according to which you have no other exit than to laugh and produce a kind of catharsis. But I was, now that you were speaking about social relationships and poor countries, and I was thinking about precisely this part of the book with the actress and the pedophile, in some way are able to find their love story, even though it's sordid and it's terrible and it's disgusting, but they are able to find a link at the end. So I think this has relation with our debate now. Sometimes things have to be like a little awful to get to something authentic, and I think that's where the humor lies in this book. I don't know if I'm wrong, Suzanne.
Well, I hope you are right, because I tend to steer towards the sordid, awful, difficult human situations, and to lend them some sense of humor, and sometimes even a bit of tenderness. Yeah.
Yeah, because without humor and irony, without this distance, it is difficult to go forward.
Yeah.
To
it's impossible.
It's impossible.
Yeah.
to come up with intelligent ideas. If you're always so stuck to the very things, it's difficult to really have a view of what's happening, and
you have to try to lift it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Actually, yeah.
And regarding, and there was some other comment that I would like to ask you regarding your critique of middle class and social construction. I don't know if that sometimes in the book you tend to say that our ways of living, and in terms of monogamy, in terms of family, it's just a logical output to capitalism. This is the sensation I have. I would like to ask if that's right. I mean, it sometimes is explained, especially when you're talking about marriage, like this is the logical world that comes from the economy of market economy and so on and so forth. Is that the way you think?
No, I don't think that the family way of life comes from capitalism, because as Àstrid would say, we find it all over in all kinds of jungle societies. But I think that the capitalist economical system is very good at exploiting the weaknesses of this family style, and that the whole world of advertisement and commercials is plunging into that. Mm-hmm. But that does not come from capitalism, no. Mm. But the commercial system offers role models and ideals and that emphasize the human need to live together.
Mm-hmm. Àstrid, do you have any?
Yeah, well, I'm insisting in the things that I recognize. There's many things in the book that on the society that is described that I recognize in our nowadays society. I guess that's why also Diana said it's a very modern book, because you can recognize a lot of things, not only the nuclear family, but also monogamy or the criminalization of infidelity, which it's an awful word. I think there's so much bigger betrayals you can do to one another in a relationship than just like sleeping with another person one day, right? I think it's a much bigger betrayal just to leave someone because they've done that. I mean, everything that we've just built together, you're just like throwing it away because I was 15 minutes and in a sexual relationship with another person. How little you really valued our relationship.
Just 15?
Just 15. Well,
that's short.
Sometimes that's in the
I have to say
case.
15. You're still young.
But there is still a huge criminalization of infidelity, even in teenagers, right? You see those TikTokers saying, "Oh, he's a son of a bitch. He was kissing another girl," and I mean, you're 15 years old. I mean, do you really expect that people are not going to play around with other person and it's really it's all around our culture. I don't know if you still see this or if you think that since you wrote the book, there's been a little bit of a decriminalization of infidelity, or you see it's the same. You're the same bad person if you're sleeping with another person that it's not your mate, official mate.
I think teenagers and young people tend to be completely intolerant about infidelity. I mean, for most of human history, this kind of behavior has existed. until now, I think that the young people will not tolerate it. And maybe because the women have become so independent and professional, they don't need a man. So the young women are very strict about moral behavior.
They are more strict now than back then.
Yes.
Okay.
That's
interesting.
That's the
your impression.
Yeah,
because you talk.
I think that's right. Let's put some example of the book, which I think it's useful. For instance, there's a very vivid and also sordid description of a rape, where the protagonist of the tale in this section of the book has to make, like, I don't know if 9 or 12 blowjobs to officers, military officers in, I don't know if it's Uzbekistan or another country. It's a country that, while I was reading it, again, it's a scene that it's also depicted with humor, the absurdity of it when she knows she gets into a cave or something like that, and then she wants to go up, and it's very theatrical and very. I'm tempted not to say the word, but it's funny. Because it's really funny, because it's really terrible, but it makes you laugh, And I thought, I don't know how women read this like too many years ago, but I'm sure a lot of women will feel violent to read this part of the book now. I don't know if you agree with me on that. Because of the approach, I mean, not because of it. I mean, it is terrible. It is damnable. It is wrong. But the way you depict it, it's like.
Well, I think there's a tendency nowadays to make such a story, if something like that happens to a young woman, there's a tendency to make it her whole story, the story of my life. I will never get over it. My life has been ruined forever. And getting some identity out of this victimhood. So I thought, yes, it's terrible, it's awful, but if we can't also laugh about it or get a different approach, then life is really
sordid, and there's no way out.
No.
Also give in this chapter or in this scene, right? You I think you also get the chance to learn something about it, right? Because I found myself reading this and like I wanted to scream at you, shout at you, and like, no, don't, just try to get out of there. Just or I was imagining if I had a daughter, what I would teach her from that story, and it's great that it's written with this honesty, because it allows us to learn something about it, right? You were really brave to explain it and really generous, right? Because we all can learn something from it. And I think also I also recognize your description of feminism in the book with what I think of current feminism, right? In which it seems as we are not, feminism is not trying to exploit and explore and exploit the virtues of femininity, but as if we should be willing to be like men and doing the stuff of men, and that's something you approach in your book, and I think it's currently happening today as well. It's like as if to be a free woman, you have to be or like to do the things that men like to do, and also almost all the feminist messages are addressed to men, and I think that's crazy. I think we should be talking to women. Feminism should be talking to women, and precisely, for example, it's sexual aggressions can be in different types. There's many types of sexual aggression. There's some that you really couldn't avoid, but there's some that you could avoid, and that doesn't make the man less son of a bitch. But if you have a chance to escape from that situation or to not get into that situation, that's what we should be teaching our young girls. So I do really think that the criticism of feminism in this book is really, really modern and modern, and it really fits our current days. I don't know if you agree with that.
Well, I'm sorry, I didn't understand the last part. I think about the rape story, that we have a general problem also relating to the whole wave of Me Too stories. Mm-hmm. That, yes, they have to be told, but the way the media exploits them mm-hmm. Makes it very difficult for women either to go to the police and retell their stories or to tell it to journalists and be entertaining about it. This whole story about sexual aggression / entertainment.
Exactly, yeah.
It's really an unsolved problem.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And I agree that this chapter about the rape is really one of the best in the book. It is really brilliant. And actually, you said once that it took you 7 years or 6-7 years to really find the way to explain this. Yeah. And also that when you finally published it with some nude pictures of yourself. I think this is brilliant. I mean, it opens up. I mean, it's a feminism that really opens the mind, which does not remain, as you said, in the victimhood, in the complaining, in the moaning. It really says, okay, I'm a woman. I can do whatever I want. I can travel to all this at the time of the URSS, to these dangerous republics. I can do whatever I want, and you are the vivid example of this. So,
yes, but it turned out I could not do whatever I want because I could have a nude photograph in an underground journal. Mm-hmm. But when I said no to the Boulevard Press that they should not use this material, mm-hmm.
They used it in the wrong way.
They used it anyway.
Yeah.
So, in confronted with the media, you cannot do what you want.
No, of course.
You cannot say
you're not completely free.
No, you're not free.
This would be naive.
Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah, since we're almost finishing, like we have 30 minutes, I will also like to ask Suzanne, let me put it in a very pedantic way, about the ethical consequences of this book, regarding also the reader of the book. Because, you know, when you're finishing reading this splendid text, you have the sensation that I was telling at the beginning, you're given the hand of a war correspondent through the basis of our middle-class daily life. You've already undermined our basic principles of life, like i.e. marriage, monogamy, and so on and so forth. So after this undermining, I had to question myself, maybe more as a philosopher than as a normal reader. So what now? I mean, that's the big question. I mean, we've undermined marriage, we've undermined community life as we understood it before. Like we should be more communitarian, we should be more open to real people. That's one of the ideas that I take from this conversation. I think it's very wise. But the problem is now, okay, what kind of organizations do we build now? If we have to build something new, maybe we just have to be ourselves and fuck them all. Is that the is that the consequence?
Well, it's a very good question to which I don't have an answer. I can only say that this book should not And I don't recommend that.
I say it's a very good book for divorces. I mean, if someone wants to read it this way, it's good as well. I mean, it's not your intention, but it's clearly good if you have that purpose.
Okay, shifting from what happens next, or with all these structures you try to undermine, or because as you said, that's not actually the main point. You should not undermine the whole society, of course. That would be naive. But rather, the importance lies on your authorial voice, as I said at the beginning. I think. I mean, I'm convinced of that. And perhaps we have 10 minutes back, I think. We can talk a little bit about your literary references, influences, because when I read you, I can see the influence of, or I can trace back to Woolf, Virginia Woolf, to Karen Blixen. Actually, you mention Karen Blixen quite often, you quote her. I can also see Joyce in the way you manage dialogues and the internal voice of your characters. There is this blending of voices where you are not sure who is talking sometimes. It's a very interesting way of managing dialogues, I think. Very natural and very, and as we were saying with Bernat yesterday, sometimes you're not sure who is talking, but you're sure Suzanne is behind that, right? And that's, very modern too. I can also see similarities with Tove Ditlevsen. I'm sure I'm not the first who says that, in the way you use experience, what I said about forcing boundaries to write, right? So what are your classic authors? What are your, what would you say, the authors that have shaped you the most?
Actually, we are sitting here in Gyldendal, where the Danish philosopher Søren Kierkegaard went to school, and I actually started to read Kierkegaard when I was 15, 16 years old, where I got like a friend in loneliness, and a comfort, saying, yes, it's all right to be alone, and to be completely in the subjective. You don't have to adapt to what other people think and what they expect. You should listen to your inner voice and be yourself. Mm-hmm. So he was really maybe the first who inspired me in that direction. And later came Karen Blixen, who taught us about courage and the sense of humor. Well, you can't just buy sense of humor in a shop. You have to develop it into your writing. Reading a lot of philosophy, anthropology, more than fiction, I think. Although I still love Hans Christian Andersen, I'm still reading him, his novels, not so much his fairy tales, but his prose. I'm just reading a lot all the time.
Okay, I think you can see that this blending of all this anthropology, essays, and literature, and the most the literary part, Hans Christian Andersen. It's a blending that you can see here. I mean, it's as you said at the beginning, it's not just an essay, which is something I sometimes miss in some of the modern writers, female writers. I love Vivian Gornick, I love Rebecca Solnit, but they are more like essayist. You cannot. I don't think you can see this blending, this which really strikes you and which makes you laugh, as you said, Bernat. I don't know if you want to add any more comments or questions. We are almost finished. We have 4 minutes back. Àstrid, Bernat.
Well, I just hope that Diana will translate one of other books about Suzanne, and I hope the next presentation we can do it in Copenhagen if you want, because it's a very good place to be. So nothing further to add. I think if people is watching, I think it's a very splendid book to read nowadays. It attacks some of our contemporary issues with great wisdom, and she is clearly a very clever woman. And she's provocative in the best sense of the word, which is very slightly used today. And it's a book that makes you think and makes you think differently, which I think is the home base of any philosopher or any writer. So I don't know. Congratulations.
Well, Bernat and Àstrid, thank you so much for joining us. I have been so inspired by your questions and our conversation. I'm taking a lot of your thoughts with me today. Thank you so much. And of course, thank you to Diana for translating the book, publishing it, and your so inspiring approach to it.
Thank you, Suzanne. It's been a real pleasure, and I hope there will come more books of Suzanne in Catalan, hopefully also presented here in Copenhagen. So, tusind tak, Suzanne. Det var så hyggeligt.
Ja, tusind tak.
Tusind tak. Det var så, thank you, sorry. Bernat and Àstrid, and also to all the people who followed this conversation from Llibreria Calders here in Barcelona. Stor tak til Gyldendal og til Torben og Lise, og stor tak også til Statens Kunstfond.
Ja.
Meget vigtigt. Så gràcies també a la Llibreria Calders, gràcies en especial a la Isabel. Bon Sant Jordi a tots, and happy International Book Day to all of you. Thank you.